All right, let's see. Hi everyone, Peter Haas here. I just realized the sound was not on. So let's try that again. A sound check, sound check, sound check. I am broadcasting live from Harlem. Broadcasting live from Harlem, New York. My studio apartment here. These AMAs are designed to be not quite class replacements, but I do want to make sure that if people have any questions, comments, or concerns, that we have a little space to kind of talk. And also, since there's a lot of the kind of social distancing, and I know myself has been feeling pretty isolated from folks, and I'm sure that these are not unusual feelings in this time, so I wanted to create a space for that. I don't really have anything in particular. Last week I had a bit of a kind of a lecture about Vinden, but I don't really have any heavy, in-depth thing to go into this week, other than the fact that I can share a little bit of what I've been training over the past week, which is does kind of tie into my lecture last week, especially because I'm in a New York-style apartment. I don't have the most spacious of areas that I can practice in. The weather's been pretty awful. Today's actually the first time I've really seen the sun in a bit. So I've been practicing the Vinden, various implementations of that. And in addition to, I've also kind of been really focusing on the Hangen, and also like practicing from the Sprechfenster. Sprechfenster, as we know, is the long point, or the application of long point. It is a really interesting thing that is mentioned in the Zornhau, but or alluded to in the Zornhau, but then placed at the end, for which there are some reasons behind that. Especially if you check out the book Sword, Science, and Society, there talks about how the original Zettel is kind of organized in form of rhetoric. So the conclusion is placed at the end. We got a message here. Oh, it's pretty quiet, at least on YouTube. Hold on one second. And also, I mumble like a crazy person. I mumble like an idiot. So let me turn it up here. Sorry about that. I can repeat some of it as necessary. How's that? Sound check? Sound check 2? Sound check? Sound check. So, to begin with, I just want to say that a longsword and Messer student, Leanne Gonzalez-Singer, is on Jeopardy right now. So if you have the ability, does anyone know what channel the Jeopardy is airing on? If you have the ability to also kind of tune into that, I highly recommend it. I'm not trying to... oh, much better. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I guess there's some Jeopardy going on, so If new people pop in a little bit, I probably will go over some of the couple things again. I also apologize for the lighting in here. Let me see if I can fix that. It's driving me bananas with this kind of... 1 second. Okay. All right, that's a little better. At least I'm not like a backlit weirdo now. Now I'm just some weirdo sitting in a white walled apartment. At least it's not a padded wall. Not yet. Okay. Anyway, so as I was kind of mentioning before, I realized the sound was awful. So one of the things that I've been practicing a lot has been Vinden, mostly because I'm in a very kind of small apartment. I don't really have a whole lot of space, and also Vinden is something everyone can also practice at home, regardless of space, because you can use a lot of even like a really, really short broom handle or extra long spoon as something to practice. And as I've been kind of reviewing these end chapters, I've been doing a lot of investigation into the application of Sprechfenster and wondering why it might be placed at the end of the gloss or even the Zettel itself. Because things like Sprechfenster and Vinden are and Hängen are constantly being referred to or implied throughout the text, right? Anyone who's taken my Zornhau class is I dive into how Zornhau is used to kind of teach responses to bind work, which really is Vinden anyway. And so why would they leave this explanation till the end? And my personal answer to that is because everything that Vinden is everything. All the 5 hues when initiated from Sprechfenster start looking like Vinden or different iterations of Vinden, and kind of can work in parallel with it. And so one of the things I've been kind of practicing, and something you might want to experiment with, is beginning in long point or Sprechfenster. Try doing the different hues, right? Try doing Krumpfhau. Oh, that looks starting to look like ox, right? Schielhau. Oh, that's starting to look like ox or Flug. Scheitelhau it becomes really, really interesting, actually. Especially if you start using the Scheitelhau that has that Sturzhau kind of element to it. And same as Zwerchhau. You know, it's very interesting in the way that it kind of starts playing out. Yeah, I think it's... and so anyway, back to the point. So that's definitely something I would recommend playing with. And then think about so as you are kind of going through and playing with these things, it is interesting to kind of think about how they fit into the context of fencing. And that is something kind of difficult to do when I'm sitting by myself in my apartment. But it's definitely something I am interested in exploring in the near future, yeah? Let's see. Let's see. So we'll probably be doing some, like, especially when we get back, probably be doing some experimental classes on that. One thing that I am working on right now is I'm working with Rob and Sarah over at Sword Class NYC. I'm going to be taking over, or at least for the time being, the short term, their longsword kind of online class stuff. And that means I'll be shooting some like little lesson plans and some informational references and stuff so that and so that all will be kind of posted up there. So it'll be technically Squinting Rabbit producing content for them, but for their platform, which will be a lot of fun. And I think a nice resource for everyone who takes those classes. And so what I'll try to do as well, I'll try to put together some of the some things I'm talking about here, say like the Vinden, like we talked about last week, and then also this kind of the application of Sprechfenster and kind of like how that plays out in fencing. I can rope some folks into helping me out, putting on some demonstrations for that. So that'll be good. Let's see. So again, the idea. So one of the thing that I've been playing with is kind of like the application of say the 5 hues, and then all of the Halbstücke from this kind of Sprechfenster position, which has been really, really interesting to kind of think about. And other questions. Another question I've gotten is like, why is it at the end? I think like Joe mentioned this last time, and I believe, and correct me if Joe's watching this, if Jess Finley talks about, I believe it's Jess Finley also talks about how there's also this level of education that's kind of being strung out, this kind of educational path that's being strung out through the glosses and the zettels and that kind of thing. So by the time you get to the end, you are now experienced enough or wise enough to be able to, say, implement things in this way. Let's see. Another reason why some of these things might be at the end, and it is. I would say it does support that theory as well. The idea that is presented in Sword Science, the book Sword Science and Society, it talks about how the Zettel is kind of arranged in terms of a classical argument, in terms of rhetoric. And at the end is always the conclusion, right? And I think last time I mentioned how like there's actually a phrase that says, and this is the conclusion of the new notes. And it's it's like referencing hanging, winding, and Sprechfenster. And so it's kind of saying these are the 3 things that are the unifier. Like these are the purpose for all of this. Actually, I think I have that book within kind of general reaching distance. I can grab that in a little bit. I don't want to just end up reading it, but I think there's some really interesting stuff in there that everyone should read, especially if they're doing HEMA. Actually, yeah, you know what? We'll do that in just a second. Yeah. So that's so I guess one of the things that's really interesting right now is kind of diving in and exploring what fencing looks like in the most efficient way from Sprechfenster. So that's what I have for now. I know that Leanne is on Jeopardy right now. Is anyone watching that? I know Dina said she has it going on her TV. I'd be interested in hearing how she's doing. I don't have access to that right now, but if someone wants to post how she's doing in the Discord, either be it in the general or in the longsword, which we kind of have, we have right here, we have the Discord kind of chat going here for our longsword club, which is great. I'm putting it here so folks can ask questions or make comments. So yeah, how's everyone doing? How's Leanne doing on the Jeopardy? Can anyone clue me in? I'm just going to enjoy this cup of tea. No, nothing. Wait, there's people on. Oh, geez, I'm sorry. There's a bunch of stuff. ABC. No one said anything about Jeopardy. I'm watching this. Oh, okay, ABC. Okay, thanks. I didn't even realize people were doing the whatchamacallit chat here. Oh, she's doing it? Good. Too many eyes on the Discord, right? I should be paying attention to the one true God, the YouTube. Yeah. Oh, no one say anything about Jeopardy. I'm watching later. Okay, Peter. Okay, that's fair. No spoilers about the Jeopardy. Only spoilers for I don't know. People aren't watching anything that requires spoilers anymore. Trying to think. Yeah, let me grab the Sword Science and Society book because there's some really interesting stuff in there about like the nature of the definition of KDF. That is something that kind of trying to get out there a little more, as well as been thinking always Krumpow. I always have all these questions about Krumpow, and I think I've kind of by exploring it through the conclusion, the kind of through the conclusion of or through Spreckfenster, it's been very, very interesting to kind of see how it operates. Yeah, so give me 1 second as I grab a couple books. So, as a lot of you know, I'm a huge fan of this book. It's Sword, Science, and Society by J. Akut. And I am, let's see, I just really like how it kind of, I like the exploration it takes into and asking a lot of questions, or puts down some ideas that answer some really basic stuff, and it really takes a look at how these materials that we study fit into, as they say, society, right, and how they viewed science and art, or the concept of arts, right. Let's see. It's very deep, and it gets into some real, fantastically scholarly stuff. One part that I find really, really interesting is the common fencing. Kind of shows you the larger corpus of fencing techniques from the time, because one of the things that it definitely talks about is how the... Well, actually, let me just go right to the chapters I've been meddling around with. And then also I have some thoughts about the layout of the whole text. Anyway, so chapter 5. So chapter 5 is really interesting because it talks about Lichtenauer and his science, and what did it mean? What did Kunst mean? What did the science of the time, the layout of how were people applying the contemporary understanding of the world, and how it was being kind of organized in this way. Let's see, the principles of scale. Oh man, yeah, it gets real deep. Philosophy of the time. Okay. This is what I think is interesting. All right. So, in Chapter 6, entitled Conclusion, Chapter 6, Part 2, I think is something we don't discuss enough in general in class, or just kind of in general. It's 4 characteristics of Lichtenauer's Kunsteffektens. And I'm just going to read from the book. I apologize. I hope that it's not... I'm not... ruining anything. I'm not spoiling the book, but I think it's interesting. So, anyway. So the four characteristics of Lichtenauer's Kunsteffektens. The first is as bourgeois. It is in a bid to generate a preliminary definition for Lichtenauer's Kunsteffektens, I offer the following four characteristics. Bourgeois. It is for a narrow bourgeois subgroup. Scholasticism, scholastic and intellectual approach. Dueling, high-risk interpersonal combat, and reform. It's a reduced skill set. Now, I actually quite like this working definition. Lichtenauer's Kunsteffektens was defined as having been a skill set of embodied knowledge intended to reform fencing and selecting from wider skills diffused in society in order to cope with interpersonal conflicts of the period. It was informed by scholasticism, both in structure and taxonomy, and it was encoded into a short set of rhyming couplets, which was propagated and preserved by a small group of experts known as the Company or Order of Lichtenauer. It was given patronage by a narrow group of affluent bourgeois individuals, the Bavarian dukes. And this is really fantastic. For a number of reasons, we should have kind of assumed some of this, right? Like the idea of like the fact that it is kind of this bourgeois kind of endeavor, or at least of the time, simply because they were committing ink to vellum or paper. I don't think it's paper, right? But the fact is that just the ability for people to read and write this stuff put them in a very particular social class, right? Let's see. So it goes on to kind of talk about kind of breaking down these 4 points, right? So the first point is like the nature of social capital has been a recurring theme within the definition we have outlined throughout the course of the sociology. People with high status were influencing and commissioned the works to be produced. But status involved intellectualism as well. So there is a dimension of raising the art. The idea is that there's a group of people producing this, right? Copying within Lichtenauer's transmission was also more common, suggesting that the material was important enough to warrant spending potentially hundreds of hours copying. Now, scholasticism. It talks a little bit about. It begins with the phrase, "Being educated is not as common as it is today." And there we go. And I think that's a really, really important thing to kind of point out. And it gets kind of deep into that. Dueling, high-risk interpersonal combat. It's this is something that I know is like a huge kind of huge and interesting argument that kind of occurs with the KDF materials. And it's something I have myself and a number of other folks have long suspected for a while, that the European longsword, to a certain degree, there's elements and certain maybe materials from certain masters that involved self-defense, but at the same time there was most likely an element of particular application, right? These are a lot of the stuff that you see in like in the Lichtenauer, many of the Lichtenauer manual-esque manuals, and is not exactly designed for battlefield use against multiple opponents. There are a lot of other schools. I think like the Montante swordsmanship is definitely something that's more targeted towards battlefield. There is also some of the broadsword manuals are definitely define themselves as battlefield techniques. And even if you look at something like some of the Japanese swords arts, in their training there are elements of dealing with more than one person at once. There are these elements of situational awareness and just large groups. and I know anyone who's kind of taken part of in a melee or some kind of group HEMA like group Gekken or group kind of thing, realize how these techniques quickly break down in that adrenaline moment. The way that these things are always discussed, like Zornhauer, Zvakhau, etc., tend to be very much against a single opponent. So they probably more fit into the idea that they are, either recreational or judicial for in their needs. That's the type of need they're serving, and indeed, if you look at kind of how fencing books evolve over time, there's a lot to do with who are they being for, especially who are they being written for, and what are they communicating. And you can see the evolution over time, them kind of going from something a little and you end them in this way, to being and then the fight is over, or you now touched your opponent or scored on your opponent. Let's see. This is the big thing that I think is really interesting. And this is something that the manuals talk about themselves, how Lichtenauer was not the one who came up with all these things, but he traveled all through the land and gathered the best of the best sorting and then distilled it down. So this is a really great quote here. It's the evidence suggests that these sources, Zettel sources, were not drawing inspiration from Lichtenauer, but rather Lichtenauer was drawing his techniques from a wider and potentially older tradition of fencing. It is likely at this stage that Lichtenauer's tradition was therefore based on common Gemeinfechtens, and represents a simplification and focus upon a dueling context. Interesting. Let's see. Oop. Let's see. There was another. Josh, I'll take a look at your question in just a second. There's a lot of other little bits that I'm going to kind of skip over. Let's see. Lichtenauer just so happened to live within one of the earliest stages of the long concept of the early stages of this long process. The long process being the rise of intellectualism, vulgar versus Kunst or craft, where the ancient customs of dueling were being usurped by logic. But while practice of dueling was still common, there was clearly a crossover period during which dueling was still common, but when the intellectualism was becoming more important in settling disputes. It appears roughly around the growth of intellectualism and the decline of dueling as a legally sanctioned practice. All right, let me see. From the perspective to society as art, do you think that some of the masters of the time were willing to invent their own elements in order? I mean, yeah, Josh. Josh asks, from the perspective of contributing swordsmanship to society as an art, do you think some of the masters of the time were motivated to invent their own elements in order to leave their mark on society? I would say probably. I mean, I think humans are, the motivation of people hasn't changed. We're all just kind of we all want to leave a mark on society in some way or another, right? Beyond ourselves, beyond. But I definitely think that there was a couple motivators. I'm sure there were fencing masters that were very much into the idea of the art, the idea of, in the same way that you can learn to paint, but you want to make sure that your paintings are remembered in some way, right? Same with fencing, or if not, to be a little bit beyond the idea of just the idea of making a new work, but kind of giving their spin on something might have been important. There's very much of this concept of kind of trying to unlock the secrets of the past, right? and I think that a lot of these fencing masters had access to some of these old manuals, and since even there might not have been the living tradition, so maybe they were reinventing it or trying to go find the original masters or something, or someone who might have known something. Yeah, I mean, they were probably also trying to make a buck. If all of this kind of fits into the society of the time, it fits into the education, so therefore it was part of this kind of greater need, in the same way that we have to teach, the same way that we teach math, science, and gym, the same way. Maybe this kind of fits in the same way, to their education at the time. But yeah, I think they were that definitely could have been a motivator, as long as same as wanting to make a buck. Because you look at Hans Madel or something, where he basically breaks all of HEMA, all of Lichtenauer down into 6 things, and that's and it basically then breaks it down into cross your arms, now uncross your arms. That's everything. Yeah. So how's everyone doing out there? Is Jeopardy still on? What's going on? Joe. Yeah. Yes, Joe. They were just as pathetic as we are. I mean, maybe better at fighting. Maybe. Probably. Maybe not. No spoilers. This is a spoiler zone. All right, so at least tell me, was it at least a 5-star episode? Was it exciting? Was it good? All right. Yeah, I apologize. I have no way of knowing what's happening on the Jeopardy. I wish I knew. I'm hoping it was exciting. And congratulations to Leanne for appearing on Jeopardy. That is so cool. Yeah, yay, so exciting. Yay. It's simply asking if it was cool and exciting. I mean, that's not a spoiler. Huh. Yeah, Joe, figure out how to torrent Jeopardy. Oh, fun. So yeah, well, how's everyone doing out there? Now that Jeopardy's over, now everyone's coming over. Okay. We might have to repeat the Vinden and Spreckfenster stuff. But joke's on you. I've switched from tea to sake, so you get the longer explanation now. Let's see. What else? While I'm waiting, because I'm sure there is some lag. Does anyone have any specific? Oh, daiquiris, nice. Joe asks, so does your book basically say that KDF was meant for nobles who had likely never been to war or fought professionally? I mean, it implies that, but it does also say, because it does kind of dive into some explanation how it was exploration of some of the text, some of the users of the system as like professional fencers, but the fact that some of it was probably written for certain higher society folk. That doesn't mean that they weren't good. That they weren't good at fencing. It just means they probably, if they were in a war, they probably were riding in very, very late after everything was most likely taken care of. Or it's even been suggested by some scholars, and I will track down a citation for this, how war came in phases. There was the actual dirty part of the war, and then there was kind of like a game part in which places might, depending on the situation, there's this kind of like facade that's being put on, in which you would have some noble folk go out and kind of do it's like a proto tournament kind of thing. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I could see it also, definitely being written for folks who had like a level of education, like the idea of like wrestling and these and basic fencing and horse Raschfechten and Raschen are part of their education, but it's not. I highly doubt that like wealthy people are fighting wars in any meaningful way. The Unterhau butterfly thing, what is it called? Dylan, which butterfly thing? There's a couple. There's the actual butterfly cut, which there's not a lot of Unterhaus in that. But if you're talking about, are you talking about the thing with the messer? Longsword thing. Oh, so all right. So there's a couple. Like I'd have to kind of, perhaps it was just a butterfly cut. So there's a couple different. So if you're talking, is it the double Unterhau cut? Because there's a butterfly cut, the Tambo in the JSA where. I have to get. It's like Oberhau and then switching Oberhau. Don't really want to get into that, but there's a double Unterhau. I know what you're talking about. Okay. Sorry, Dylan. It takes a minute for me to kind of figure out. And Lilian, I see your question. I will get to it. I promise. So Dylan, the double, the thing you're talking about is kind of like, as I like to call it, a kind of double Ausstrecken. So it's the idea of tell me about all the things. Yes, I can tell you about all of them. So the one thing I do a lot is these kind of clearing strikes. So the idea is that it's the first. I'm not typically someone who's going to talk about flourishes, and it's not really meant to be a flourish. So it's kind of in some ways a kata for longsword. But the idea being, the first Unterhau is designed to be like an Ausstrecken, a striking away. So the sword will be coming in, and the sword will come in, and the idea is you're knocking it away. Now, and this is good because it removes the threat, especially if that person's, say, in long point, you can knock the blade out. Now, the second Unterhau is designed in case that person that. Sorry, these are coming in. I am entertained, Liliana. I am entertained. So, first strike, clear the blade. The second one is designed to be in case that blade is coming back towards you. It's a second Ausstreck, emergency Ausstrecken. Now, the idea from that second one is that it's more. The first one is maybe a little wider, a little more clearing. The second one should be definitely more towards the person. The idea being that if they aren't able to bring the sword back, you're bringing the sword back in general towards the person, so then you can stab or hit them, right? But in those instances where, say, you clear the sword and they're striking back, you can clear again and then move back in. Or if you're lucky, you'll have cleared their sword into a bind, and then you can use like Vinden, and then you can use like Fulen and Vinden and like KDF stuff, other work, as the texts say, to finish the job. And so that's the butterfly thing. I'll try to put some videos together of the possible different butterfly things. But I think that's what you're talking about. We'll do a video on it, and when we're all back in the same space training, we can spend some time working on that. One of the other Unterhau things that we frequently do is for the test cutting, the double Unterhau. So it's so here, cut, and generally what you're trying to do is you're cutting low, and then you want to doing a shorter Unterhau, and it's going to be higher, and then you kind of cut that way. Okay, cool. Dylan, I will. Let's see. I will. We'll definitely do some videos on that, so we can actually demonstrate it. I think. Yes. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Well. All right. What book, time period, culture were you talking about, Peter? Also, thanks for doing this. Oh yeah, you're welcome. The weeb clothing is just because I'm more comfortable wearing a kimono today, and I didn't put on pants today, and I don't intend on doing it, period, so kimonos for everyone. Let's see. Let's see. So the book, Liliana, is Swords, Science, and Society. I can post a link for this book. I really, really recommend it because it's just a really, really curious read. I read it's a really quick read. It's dense, but I think the information just kind of like sucks me in. It really sucked me in, and like I just was kind of hypnotized by it. And so it is really kind of talking about. It's interesting because it takes a look at definitely the Lichtenauer stuff, which is, that 15th century material, 15th, late end of 14th century things, but it also references a lot of material that is older, because it talks about how a lot of the Lichtenauer and even some of the Gemeinfechten, the common fencing stuff, references older accumulations of fencing. It's and so you have like and so it's definitely like the German-esque, because I don't think Germany was a thing, but it's like that kind of the Germanic kind of state, also like Europe at the time, and let's see, what was the other question in there? So I definitely recommend this book for exploration of that. And what is nice, so it covers that like 14th, late 14th and 15th century materials, but it also kind of takes a peek at how fencing or the Lichtenauer Lichtenauer derived Fechtbuchers in the 16th century also kind of came about. 16th, 17th century, that kind of stuff. And how over the course of a couple hundred years, the social context for these type of sword interactions changes, and it morphs from being a way, this kind of like very highly protected course on judicial dueling, so to speak, kind of wrapped up in a particular argument. The hypothesis there is the fact that because part of the reason that this material is presented in this way is that this dueling at that late 13th century, late 14th century, 15th century was kind of being replaced as with logic and intellectualism as a way to solve disputes. So this was Lichtenauer's attempt at kind of, or like the Society of Lichtenauer attempting to make a logical argument for the application of a higher form of fencing that would. And this is happening while kind of like the idea of the judicial duel is kind of fading away in society, and then as things start evolving in the ways of like not everything's a handwritten manuscript, and it's maybe done away with as a blood sport or judicial sport, into being more of a fencing art, or fencing like a starting kind of its long crawl into sport, more sportified reasons. So yeah, it's a really interesting kind of snapshot of that transition, or an attempt to kind of by taking a look at like the overall evolution of everything, and kind of what was happening in society, and what the rules and kind of general bits are of all the society at the time. It's interesting engineering. Of course, there's always trouble with reverse engineering things, because you kind of it doesn't allow for that kind of organic, I would say, like the randomness that are is the reality of life, but yeah, and also no worries. I assumed a lot of people would be tuning in after Jeopardy, so that's why I saved the drinking. Let's see. Another part of this book that I really enjoyed is, aside from the kind of longer dive into why is the Zettel organized the way it is, not necessarily because that's the best way to teach it, but because it is a set of information being presented in a certain way for a classical argument. It has a whole lot of information about this kind of reassembling of a Gemeinfechten Zettel. It references a common fencing Zettel. It talks a lot and breaks down some like really basic, some other German sources that is not Lichtenauer, including some Talhofer stuff. So we got a question coming in. Going back to Winden from Long Point, does distance dramatically change your winding action from that starting point, or doing Zornhau from closer, farther, long point? I mean, distance always changes everything, right? Going back to the Winden from Long Point, does distance dramatically change your winding action? In what way, Kat? I think that, like, in general, when you start using Streckfenster, it does create more distance because you are what Joe said. But also, even though you are shortened, maybe in a physical stance, there's still that psychological pressure of the sharp tip being faced at someone, or even the blunt tip kind of facing someone, especially if you're applying that Zanshen, that kind of that force with it. But also, I think that in that case, you're probably going. But I think I see what Kat's kind of getting at. Is that going to kind of radically change? Or actually, no, Kat's typing something. So why don't you, if you have a little bit more elaboration on that, that would be really helpful. Also, side note, Josh, I am not wearing the hakama over the kimono. Yes, they are technically pants, but are they? Yes, I am wearing all my jewelry today. I've sanitized everything, so hooray. Also, every day can be a drinking day. It's just about volume control. One to judge. Okay. So, I mean, I guess the idea of having from long point, it is going to kind of change the distance in which you are attempting to deploy things from. If someone starts moving to the strong, you probably might find yourself in some form of grappling range already, or etc. But also. Fighting from Sprechfenster to me also makes the 5 hues more functional. I think that they all of a sudden make more sense to a certain degree, and it makes me really consider that those almost like those 5 chapters in the front might be these training modules, part of the argument. But I'll get that are kind of defining, that are showing you hey, look. The core of the system completely works. Like I said last week, the idea that the Zornhau is being presented as, even though it's a peasant strike, it's still all of the magic of KDF still work. So in terms of when you're in the long point, or the using Sprechfenster to kind of see what they're doing, it makes you're probably closer to that Zufekten moment, if that makes sense. And it also again, it depends on how you are fighting. How is your opponent fighting? Are they a buffalo? Are they someone who's very cautious? Are they someone who is going to be more likely to thrust or cut? So you are going to case by case. That's what makes teaching fencing really on the internet really hard, right? Or saying these definitive things about fencing really difficult. You can have these concepts, but it really, a lot of the thing that isn't as frequently discussed as I would like is the fact that your opponent isn't always fighting smartly, or it might have a variety of tactics and techniques that they're using. Some of which might be smart, and some of them which might be completely stupid, and in some cases really suicidal, and you still have to deal with it in a way that keeps you safe. So you have things like KDF, which is get in the bind, and this is the magic from the bind, and it seems like the focus of a lot of the text is about how to protect, get into a bind, and then this is how you protect yourself. Use your sword as a shield. Encourage that, even though they say for you to act first, it is funny that they say act in the vor, even though most of the techniques they discuss are knock and vor. For anyone who wasn't here earlier, one of the things that I've been sorry for the folks that were, but I was going over earlier, just the idea that one of the things, being in a small apartment, a studio apartment, talked a lot about winding and practicing windings. The idea of also on top of those windings, really utilizing Spreckfenster. There's that old joke that the New York people always fight in Spreckfenster because we have low ceilings. Well, time to prove them true. But also, the text kind of tells us to, right? So from practice from the Spreckfenster, doing the different hues, and try applying the different Hapstücke, or demonstrations, as I like to call them, from the Spreckfenster. Oh yeah, Sam. Yes. I totally agree. Like, I think that, like, it is really, really hard when you have people, as I always say, who get. Some folks just want to get into the grapple range because they have the force. And someone like me who's a small fighter, I don't want to be in grappling. I just don't want to go there, because when you are fighting someone in a different weight class, you're just your chances decrease dramatically, and so it's all about finding ways to, like, use the sword to fight smarter, and keeping your distance to fight smarter. What are you doing to stay in practice these days? That's a good question. So one of the things I'm doing is I'm just doing a lot of general working out. I have never been like a gym rat, so trying to pull my ass off my chair, my bed. I own one chair, and sit on the floor a lot because I've been doing. I have a pull-up bar for my apartment it's one of those pull-up bars you just kind of stick in your door frame, and just keep doing various iterations of pull-ups, push-ups. A lot of Pilates are a really, really great thing to work on core strength, and also really simple, tiny practice cuts. I am lucky enough that I have just enough room that if I go to Einhorn, I can practice my cuts. So I kind of go out and then just begin by tracing pattern. So this is a thing that I've talked about a lot in class, and this is a way I can do my practice cuts in a small apartment. A lot of you have seen this. So this here is like a weighted trainer. It is supposedly for one-handed, which is for most folks it is. But as you can see, I have tiny hands, so I'm lucky enough that I can put both hands on this trainer. I highly recommend everyone get something of this nature. I'm not a huge fan of the one that I think it's Purple Heart makes makes one that is more sword shaped. I'm not a huge fan of it. I think it kind of misses the point. It doesn't have the right weight distribution, but this really forces me to cut with my core and use my arms as a springboard / guidance system. Otherwise, I get real tired real fast. Hoping to get a heavier one just cause. So there's that. And also, the other thing is also, I'm working out a little bit every day, or doing all these, I'm doing all my practice cuts and thrusts every day. I am not trying, I'm also trying to be conscious of not overworking out, if that makes sense. Simply because, doing too much in any given day can wear you out. I know not everyone agrees on if rest days are required or not. I know I psychologically need them once in a while, but yeah. Also, resistance bands. That's a really nice $10 solution, or depending on where you get them from. You can order resistance bands, and I find work with resistance bands right now are really, really great. um, um, either just trying to. They're also really good for practicing opening up the chest and just trying to like get your arms used to extending with resistance. And Dina's right. Do not get the spatula thing. Tis a silly device. All right, we got just about 20 minutes left. And I got a whole bottle of sake, so keep the questions coming. Yep. They are very good for the wrists. Trying to think if I'm also been doing kind of like target practice with thrusts and like I said, windings again because that's something you can do inside. Yes, Josh is right. The spatula thing is it's a real unfortunate missed opportunity. I think it was kind of an attempt at making a one size fits all solution for some things, but as everyone's like the handle is extremely long. It is kind of modeled on some of the old Regagnets or that had some of the more ridiculous handles, I think, but it doesn't matter. I personally do not, along with a lot of other folks here, do not recommend. That being said, I do recommend wooden swords and these kind of like weighted trainers. Yeah. Liliana, maybe try to use a weighted trainer or a trying to think what else would work target practice. Maybe a tennis ball or a plastic cup. See, if you're putting holes in the closet, that means you just need to practice more. Sorry. One thing I will say in terms of in all honesty, in all seriousness, I would say one thing you can do is slow down the practice. If you are finding that you're putting a hole in the closet or a hole in a wall or something, slow down. One of the things that I think happens really frequently, and I catch myself doing this all the time, is that we exit mindful practice. We get really used to the fact like, oh, I've been doing swordspersonship for practicing the art of the sword for blank years, and now I'm gonna do this because I want to do it fast. I want the excitement. I think that's kind of that's against training. Some of the best advice I've ever gotten was practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. So the idea of really boiling down what you're attempting to practice in a moment and thinking about everything, thinking about even the most basic, how am I holding my body? How am I breathing? Are my feet pointed in the right direction, etc., etc. Putting a target, so let's say you have a tennis ball on a string or a plastic cup or what have you, and just begin and say Schreckfenster or Flug and or Aber or what have you, and practice all the most basic moves it takes to hit that target, and do it 100 times slow, and 100 times slow and 100 times slower than you normally would. It's not as exciting, but it's building in the proper muscle memory. And then after you do each thrust, go through the little checklist. Was my footwork correct? Was I making sure I was balanced? I wasn't leaning too far in, or I wasn't leaning too far back. and by kind of making practice more about not just doing the thing for the sake of doing the thing, but doing the thing in a mindful manner, it will improve. It is a better tool to help us improve. Myself included, like I say, all my teachers ding me all the time for mindless practice, and so it's one of my 2020 goals, aside from finding ways to get out of the apartment while practicing safe social distancing. But practicing in a more mindful way, and using practice as a real tool, not just something I feel like I need to do. So less guilt, more intellectual application. Also, I am probably ranting on normally even longer than I normally would, simply because the delay. So I apologize. Where did my alcohol go? Shoot some more questions at me here. I'm going to re-up the beverage. Let's see. So I'm drinking some sake I got at a local wine store. I'll probably be putting in an order for this again. It is really delicious. It has a slight licorice smell, but you don't get any licorice kind of taste. It is really, really crisp and I want to say dry, but there is like this floral sweetness to it. I am a huge fan, and it wasn't all that expensive. Forget exactly what it's running for right now. But after this, because I do want to slow down, at least on this one, until I can get another bottle or secure another bottle, I'll probably switch to something real classy, like either a Pabst Blue Ribbon or a Sapporo. In terms of practices to get us into a more mindful set of practice, I personally can only tell you what I do. That is not something. Dylan, if you are, you're around the Harlem area, right? We'll do a social distancing handoff of some sake. In terms of in terms of getting yourself into the mindset of doing the mindful practice, I can only tell you what I do. I don't like calling it meditation, but I have issues with calming my mind. My thoughts are typically kind of always presented to me in this very loud screaming kind of emotional cloud, right? That then I have to real time parse. So one of the things I do a lot is breathing, and I try to just kind of clear my mind, so I guess one would say meditation, some form of meditation, and doing that kind of helps
quiet the cloud and allows me to then start thinking of things in a linear way. Yeah, I mean, but yes, we can do the sake handoff. But yeah, so it's very much like I find breathing helps. Kind of a brief meditation kind of helps. Also, another thing that really helps is that I have different uniforms for when I practice. Be it my Japanese swordsman art or the kind or the longsword. People have seen me in class. Like I have an outfit that I put on, and it is a transition. I am putting on the uniform for the job that I have to do, and which is a nice kind of psychological thing to do. In addition to that, it's also kind of I do little things like, say, especially when I'm by myself, I tell myself, all right, I'm setting a timer for 15 minutes, and I'm going to, for 15 minutes, only try to think about these things. And as I am doing, and I start simple, so like doing warm-up cuts, I just do that warm-up cut, and I constantly am doing a check-in. Check-in, it's like, overhow, check-in, overhow, mentally check-in. And then I can kind of trick my own thought cloud into being more of a stream of thought by always having that kind of little program, that series of little series of check-ins, right? All right, my foot okay, and then kind of after I do say like an overhow, all right, what were like 3 things I can improve from that? All right, let me do the next thing, and that's a big thing too. And I've made some folks do this while they were while sparring. Go and fence, but then you have to maybe I think this comes from maybe Tim Kaufman or Toby. Tell me the last 3 things that just happened, or tell me what just happened. Why did that fail? Why did this happen? And then having to then explain something then helps me kind of refine it. So if I'm doing a thrusting practice and I keep missing, like why do I keep missing? Oh, you know why? Because I'm not moving my arms first, and I'm not looking at the target. So I need to always remember to look at the target. Do the same practice with that in mind. Okay, I'm still missing. Oh, it's because my arms aren't moving in the correct way. So now make sure I'm still looking at the target, moving my arms. Now I move my feet, and so by kind of forcing yourself to reteach yourself in those moments of practice, I think are always helpful for at least me. If anyone else has any anyone has any recommendations, please drop them in the chats. Yeah, so it's like the idea of and to be really honest, like having to teach a lot of this stuff has helped too, because having to explain it to other people has radically changed how I approach the things all the time, and having the kind of that responsibility of saying like, all right, I always have to make sure I'm doing this in a certain way so that I can help other people understand this material in a certain way too. So especially for senior students, I think it's really important for us to kind of focus on those elements and on these things so that we can help newer students. Also, 2 or 3 Lamaritas in, you're not going to be thinking about a whole lot of things, so you'll be pretty mindful of something. I agree, Sam. Oh, damn, this sake is very good. I think also thinking about what we're doing. I think one of the biggest misinterpretations of a lot of the text is that everything's a magic bullet. Like I said before, everything's case by case. By being mindful, even in a solo drill, it helps us be more mindful in a active fencer scenario. There are remedies to things, but again, feeling is supposed to be the core of the art. It's the thing we're always reacting to, right? So we have to remember that we need to be in a place at all times where we're receiving information, and through our learning and our trial and error of our learning, we're learning, being able to deploy correctly a response. And that kind of, and I think that kind of, and I think I might have said this last week, and I don't remember if I did or not, but one of the things also about kind of exploring these texts, we have to remember that we shouldn't necessarily be seeking the knowledge of their time. It's like, I think the saying is something along the lines of, don't seek the knowledge of the ancients, but seek what they sought. And I think what they sought here is a way of fencing while keeping themselves fencing while, they're fencing the win. I mean, who isn't? But at the same time, I'm hoping that there is some type of desire for art, not just in the terms of craft, but in terms of kind of like how we conceive of art now. Actually, Leech, Dina, that actually sounds really, really tasty. Yeah. So let's see. We got just about 15 minutes left. What's going on in everyone's minds? How's everyone holding up? Oh, Liliana, I'm glad that this is helpful. That's kind of. I'm hoping this keeps everyone in some good sword spirits. Also, some good spirits. I can't wait to hear more about what happened on Jeopardy. I'm very excited. I was talking about the 8-Foot book. Yeah, Sam, if you have any questions about the book, lay it on me. Because I have it right here. Woo. Oh, man, I can't wait to go through this common fencing part. All the vulgar fencing. I'm a big fan of the vulgar fencing. Oh, got some questions coming in. Ooh, here we go. I mean, I think that, like, Sam, I think that's I think that it's a little of both, maybe. There is definitely so many ways to swing a sword, and I think part of that you can see that between like some of other cultures and their sword arts. It's the same as like the pyramids, in North and South America, and then like in like Egypt. There's no aliens involved there. It's just the fact the pyramid is very efficient, straightforward, structure. In the same way, like there's only so many ways to swing something that is like a thin piece of metal with two sharp edges. But at the same time, the book does talk a lot about a larger corpus of fencing techniques and techniques and application. And I think that the Gemaim Fectens is a legitimate source of knowledge, and maybe not just a series of techniques. It definitely, based on, if you look at just the language that is being used to describe some of the techniques and methodology and the approach to the fencing, things that aren't just, say, like about time. I mean, in terms of timing and in terms of the technique names in themselves, it definitely is like a little too overlappy, similar to be a coincidence, especially given geography. And I think that there probably is. He definitely is arguing the fact that there is much more cross-pollination because of the fact that, like, you have Europe, you have a certain class of folk in Europe who are kind of in their own time attempting to build this structured society around, like, this scholastic, they are trying to, this scholastic thought, this kind of, like, wave thinking. There is a lot of material to pull from, and as even like the original texts themselves say, they are not based upon a new sword art; they are based upon many. And I think this book actually gives a really good example of, at least for some of the German tradition, some of the materials where that's being pulled from. That being said, what I also think is really interesting is that it talks about how, if one was to review the biography of Talhofer, someone like Talhofer was a soldier, then became fencing instructor. And so it's it becomes like a really interesting when you look at like the works of Talhofer versus, who also was thrown out of the Society of Lichtenauer at some point. It's interesting to see where some of the overlap occurs, and then also when they're like, no, but do it this way if you really want to win. Just saying. Yeah, I'm sorry. The folks have been Kat. I'm sorry that you were not doing earlier today. It's things feel crazy, and I'm sure this is something a lot of folks are saying, like talking about, is like things feel crazy, and we're all just gonna have bad days. And so it's another reason why I wanted to set this up, is so we have a forum to discuss it, and I want everyone to feel comfortable talking about their good days as well as their bad. Americans are very, very bad about talking about our bad days. That American politeness culture, right? So please, this is a space and for that. Dina, it's a good. That is actually a benefit of being at home, right? If you have the space and can do cuts, you can hear them. You can hear the hasuji or the blade alignment and the sword vin. It's good. It's especially, I know that one sword, Dina, that you're using is like has amazing. It sounds amazing. It's like it's almost like cinematic in the way that it like cuts through the air. It's really awesome. Sam, yeah, the book is very. I find it to be a fast read, but it is dense and requires multiple rereadings, and kind of sometimes skipping around to kind of make those relationships. Yeah, we talked a little earlier. I think like at the beginning of the hour of like four, like the chapter 6 where they talk about like the 4 defining characteristics of Lichtenauer, and one of those was about like it's an attempt at reforming fencing and kind of boxing it into this kind of like explanation. We have just about 5 minutes left. I'm here for you. So, yeah, all right. And yes, well, always. I mean, I just assumed that the alcohol was implied. You expect me to deal with all these problems and not have a drink in my hand? Does anyone have any larger, in general, any questions regarding swords or anything else? I am here. Oh yeah, Dina brings up a really good point. Jess Finley is having a live stream on the Facebook. Is it Facebook? Very soon. She has a really, really fantastic lecture about the use of information trees, medieval trees, and how they kind of contain and are a good, interesting method for communicating the Kunstesfechten. We got to check out her talk at the Long Point, which, oh my god, was that just last year? Oh my god. Damn. It is a really, really fantastic dive into kind of how to put it, kind of in a lot of ways what they're getting at here in terms of looking at the materials through the eyes of the people attempting to organize and discuss it at the time, which context, right? Something we're always trying to work more into our scholarship of Kunstesfechtens. Oh, I believe that starts in about 2 minutes, so I'm going to wrap up here so that folks can get over to Jess Finley's stream. I don't want to cut into her time, so I would like to thank everyone for being here. If people are interested, on Friday, I will be doing on the Discord channel, the Sword Class NYC Discord channel, I will be live streaming a movie, probably something to do with swords, probably a very bad movie to do with swords, and I will be drinking and giving commentary. As I do in general, if folks need anything, be it sword related, or if you just need to talk because things are weird and you just need to vent, I'm here for everyone. I'm available via Discord, Facebook, any email, phone, whatever you need. I am around. I am a non-essential worker, so I am home all day. But yes, if anyone needs anything, please do not hesitate to reach out. Or if you just want to say hi, because it's nice to not feel alone in the insane world that is New York right now. Anyway, I hope everyone's keeping their spirits up high. As I've said before, the HEMA community is a really, really great one. I know everyone's been very, very supportive, and I really look forward to getting back together in the same training space and having one hell of a rager that day. So everyone, take the next day off of work, because we're going to have a good party. That being said, have a great night, everyone. Check out Jess's live stream. I am around. I'm going to be up till forever o'clock on the Discord. Have a really, really great night, and I'll talk to you all soon. I will be doing this at the same time, same channel next week. So from 7 to 8:30, normal Tuesday class time. I'm working, again, just to reiterate, I am working with Sword Class